I'm Haley Stewart, and I'll be discussing Standards 3 and 4 of the evaluation tool. So Standard 3.1 says requires students to adhere to specific and consistent procedures to experience success in the digital classroom. So I kind of see these as the rules and guidelines and policies you set as an online teacher that help your online class run smoothly. Students know what to expect, they know your rules, they know your policies and procedures, and so that helps them be successful in the online environment. So for me, my consistent policies and procedures are stated at the beginning of every unit I've made. So eShore puts in a couple documents that students will see every time. But I put in documents that students will see every time as well. I've started doing an introductory video that goes through all of these documents that students have to watch. And so I'm not expecting them to sit and read all these, I guess. I'm making them watch me read all these things for them so they understand my class policies and procedures. And then these documents are there for them. I give them my email and I tell them when I grade each night so they know when to expect their graded work back for me. I'm pretty consistent about grading at night, so I let them know that. I let all students know my grading criteria, how much each type of assignment is worth, and how the class is weighted. I have a lot of issues with plagiarism on some of my assessments, and so I started inserting this plagiarism at the beginning in this introduction folder, and I've had a pretty dramatic drop in cases of plagiarism. So, and this, like I said, is in the introductory video, so they hear me talk about it, and then it's there for them. But this one, I feel like, helps me be consistent. It helps them know that I'm looking for plagiarism in their assessments, and so it's kind of helped that run a little bit more smoothly than it has in the past. I also list my objectives, and this is going to be big for Standard 4 that we'll talk about in just a minute. But here, these are the things that students should be able to do or know by the end of the unit. I almost always have a vocabulary sheet as well, in science especially. It's like learning a new language almost. And so I give students a vocabulary sheet, and then I always give them a study guide that they can either save or print out so they know what's going to be happening in the unit and what type of vocabulary and what kind of concepts they need to know for the test. And then at the end of my introduction folder, there's an introduction quiz that they have to take. So it's, if they've paid attention in the video or they went back and read these documents, it should be pretty easy to get 100%. But this is just one more way that for them to know what my class policies and procedures are. 3.2 is engages students in collaborative learning activities. And if I were to grade myself on this right now, I would give myself a big fat 0. I don't have any collaborative learning activities. And as we went through this in the small group of teachers, this can be a really hard one for an online environment, it can especially create a lot of workload for you as the teacher. So I feel like this one is one we need to really collaborate on as teachers and figure out good ways to get this one done. Ways we talked about in our small group were using the discussion feature in Brain Honey. That's one way we can get students to collaborate together. A couple of the other teachers require that students' papers or assignment or whatever be evaluated by 3 peers. So that's one way collaboration can occur. As I was looking up for ideas about how I could get collaboration happening in my classroom, this page came up about using Google Apps for collaboration. So you could just have students send students a link to a Google Doc or a Google presentation, and they can insert a paragraph or their own slide or whatever, and then they can look at what all the other students are doing as well, and that kind of really utilizes these good programs that are within Google, and so students don't have to download anything special. It's just right here in the web browser. 3.3 gives feedback to students and parents when contacted in regards to student progress. And so this one, there's not really a range. You either do it or you don't. I'm pretty timely in getting back with students. I just responded to one today and I should have put that one up. But I also give feedback to like digital curriculum teachers. If I see students really struggling with a particular assessment, I always send out an email And then if I don't hear back from them, I'm like, hey, please get back with me. And then hopefully almost always I get a response. So that's one way that I give feedback to students and parents and digital curriculum teachers in my class. Moving on to Standard 4. Standards 4 is all about content knowledge. And the first indicator, 4.1, says states USOE, so that's Utah State Office of Education, measurable student learning objectives in digital courses concisely in student-friendly language. So before I even talk about that one, I want to talk about how you find the USOE student learning objectives. So if you open up a browser, a window, and you type in Utah Core Curriculum, your first suggestion will be from UEN. So you can click right on that, and it has all the subjects listed, and you can click on any of these and find what your state core curriculum is. So for example, if I click on this one, here's health. It lists a standard with objectives and then indicators, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So there's one for health. Here's the ones for PE. There's a bunch in PE, different classes with different standards and objectives. So this is how you find your core curriculum. And this is how you know what the science or what the state wants you to be teaching. And this is what accreditation will be looking for as well, that your curriculum is tied to the core standards. So we're going to look at my core standards. I'm in science biology. And here's my core. So in biology there are 5 standards. It varies from every course. So standard is kind of like the big idea. It's the big concept of what students should know. So standard 1, big idea, is basically ecology. They'll understand that organisms interact with their environment. And then there are objectives listed under each standard. And this one summarizes how energy flows through an ecosystem. That's an objective. And to me, that's pretty student friendly. We'll learn about how energy flows through an ecosystem, so they should be able to answer that objective pretty well. Now below here, these aren't objectives according to the state, I guess. These are indicators. So if students are able to arrange components of a food chain according to energy flow, that could help support them being able to summarize how energy flows. So these indicators aren't the end-all be-all. You don't necessarily have to teach these. These are just things that the state has suggested help support the main objective. You might want to make your own objective that you feel like fits better in measuring the objective or in the main objective here. But generally I like the indicators that the state has provided, and so I create these into just being my objectives. So already I don't have to think of objectives, and I don't have to think of measurable objectives. They're right here. Are students able to arrange components? That one's pretty easy to measure, right? If they put the components of a food chain in the right order. So that's a little bit about the core and how you find your core and what the core all means. So going back to 4.1, you state measurable objectives in your course. So if we go back to my ecology course here and we look at the objectives, this is my objective list for the students, and it's basically the core that I've put down and I've made into objectives. And at the beginning of every lesson for me, I always have an introduction, and it always lists what objective that lesson is trying to teach and what students should be able to do by the end of that lesson. So that's 4.1. And again, there's no like spectrum here. You either do it or you don't. And so I would highly recommend using the core if you have a core to use those objectives, to make those objectives, and then that way they're already done for you and they're easy to use. Now for me, I have a course too that isn't a core course. I've made a zoology course, and I had to come up with my own objectives. But I did that, and as I was going through lessons, I thought, oh, in this lesson they should be able to list, in this they should recall, classify, define, and these are all objectives that they should be able to do in this unit. So objectives can be created without a core as well. Moving on to 4.2, 4.2 says the teacher demonstrates in-depth content knowledge. This knowledge is portrayed in student learning activities. And this indicator is a little bit different than the others. The others you should be able to provide evidence for the principal to look at within your course. This one is judged by the principal, and it is on a spectrum. The principal finds no evidence of in-depth knowledge of content knowledge, little, some, or abundant. So for me, this one is just evident in the way I design my course and in the way I teach my course and in the way I assess my course, that I'm able to give appropriate feedback to students, that I'm able to answer student questions whenever there's an email about a certain concept, that I can relay the information to students in a clear and concise manner. That to me shows that I have an in-depth knowledge of my curriculum and of my content. 4.3 says supports students in learning and using academic language accurately and meaningfully. This is especially important for me in science and biology because there is a lot of new vocabulary. So for me, I support students by giving them a vocabulary sheet a lot of the time. I support students by giving them a study guide so they can see what concepts and see how this vocabulary fits in to the content. I also quiz quite regularly on vocabulary, just what does this word mean, define this word. So it is step 1, depth of knowledge, but it does help support students in building up their depth of knowledge up to a 2, 3, or 4. So that for me is the end of standards 3 and 4 of the evaluation tool.